Welcome to The Partial Historians.
We explore all the details of ancient Rome.
Everything from political scandals to love affairs, the battles waged, and when citizens turn against each other. I'm Dr. Rad.
And I'm Dr. G. We consider Rome as the Romans saw it, by reading different ancient authors and comparing their accounts.
Join us as we trace the journey of Rome from the founding of the city. Welcome to another episode of The Partial Historians, an ancient Roman history podcast. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Rad.
And I am Dr. G.
Hey there, Dr. G.
Hey there.
What's happening?
Oh, just sitting down, ready to talk about ancient Rome in all of its glory.
We are in an exciting moment, Dr. G, because we've been tracing the journey of Rome from the founding of the city, and we are slowly edging our way towards the turn into a new century, which I find very exciting. I don't know why, because, of course, centuries are arbitrary, but hey.
I think it is exciting, partly because as historians, we tend to periodize things mentally. So it's like, even though it might not just be another year, it holds a certain significance because we start to think about, well, we'll call it a different century and maybe there'll be some different evidence coming through and maybe events will shift. Who knows what we'll discover?
Indeed. Now, if you haven't been listening to the podcast up until now, highly recommend you go back because we've been talking a lot about the conflict of the orders, which is between these two supposed groups, the patricians and the plebeians. And quite frankly, we can't recap it all here.
It's long and arduous, and let's just say the patricians are probably, on the balance, still on top.
Indeed, and the plebeians are, on the whole, not. So, Dr. G, we're up to 407 this episode, but before we get into that, what happened in 408 BCE?
Well, if my recollection serves, 408 was marked by a little bit of military tribunes with consular power. Then that gave way to a dictator and his master of the horse. They did
not without some slappy fighting there.
No, there was some upset folk amongst that, but nevertheless, it went ahead, and they headed down to Antium, which is south of Rome but on the coast, and they took back what I think Rome thought was theirs, which was control of Antium. Because Antium had sort of started to get into a little bit of a situation with the Volsci and the Aequians. And although it seems like they were laughing at those guys, in any case, there seemed to be a confluence of these groups of peoples in the south towards Antium, and Rome was not having that. They were like, that looks like collaboration. We're not into that kind of thing. Let's go down and put a stop to that right there. And they did.
Indeed, with remarkable ease.
So easy that we have no details about the battle.
Exactly, which means that I think it's time for us to dive in to 407 BCE.
It's 407 BCE. What a time to be alive.
It is. Now, I did give a bit of a spoiler last time, which is that we know that we've got military tribunes with consular power, which means there is a possibility for plebeians. But once again, I did ruin it by saying that there weren't going to be any elected. So we know it's going to be all patricians all the time.
Patricians all the way down. So we get 4 of them voted in as military tribunes with consular power for 407.
Indeed. Now, I also did let slip that they all have previous experience in this position.
They do, which kind of suggests that Rome, whether our analytic sources are telling us or not, seems to suggest that Rome in this period maybe had some military qualms and were concerned about things that were going on in the general neighborhood. So maybe they wanted some experienced players in there.
I think they had an evil plan. I think Rome was planning to take over the world. And by the world, I mean some more territory.
The things next door, at the very least.
God damn it, I want those things next door.
I see what's over on that fence. The grass is greener, and I shall have it.
Look, we mock. But by this point, Rome is actually the preeminent power in this area at this point in time.
They are. They seem to be consistently winning now, at least from what we've seen from the last few years. That wasn't true before.
No. And like the Etruscans are there, but they're more just there. They're not like, you know.
Oh, well, let's not foreshadow that one too much. Wait for it, guys.
Well, yeah, like they are there, but they're not like menacing Rome, really.
They haven't come south for some raids for a little while.
No, like, anyway.
We'll see. I'm looking forward to what happens in this year because all I have is a great passage to read out to you from Diodorus Siculus.
Ooh.
Yet again. And in terms of evidence, literally the Fasti Capitolini, which I've supplemented, as always, with Broughton, who I adore.
Naturally. Yeah.
So our military tribunes are Lucius Furius Medullinus. A Furii. Woohoo.
Yeah. Now, we have met this particular Furii before, I believe.
We certainly have, and very recently as well. He was previously consul in 413 and also in 409, which was not that long ago.
No, and that was the big year when everyone was very upset because the plebeian actually got somewhere.
How dare they?
I know, it's very rude.
Then we have Gaius Valerius Volusi Potitus Volusus.
Another familiar name.
Indeed. So he was previously consul in 410.
Yep.
And also a military tribune with consular power in 415.
So he swings both ways.
He doesn't mind what you call the position as long as he gets it.
Oh, yeah.
He's that kind of guy. We have a guy whose praenomen is up for grabs, but only because Livy is wrong. I know.
Shocking.
So,
Shots fired.
the majority of sources for this period suggest that his praenomen is going to be numerous.
Okay.
But Livy seems to think it might be Gnaeus.
Well, I mean, isn't that just fitting in with the whole idea that he has numerous praenomen?
I have sad news, listeners. I have to retire from this podcast now. So we've got numerous or Gnaeus Fabius Vibulanus.
Okay.
Previously consul in 421 and military tribune with consular power in 415. So an old colleague of our Volusus.
Friends.
Friends indeed, our friends indeed.
Yeah.
And finally, to round out this group of four, is Gaius Servilius Ahala.
Well, colour me completely unsurprised.
Yeah, look, this guy's back for the second year in a row.
Yes, but he made quite a splash last year, so yeah, I'm not surprised. I understand that the Romans probably like him very much indeed.
It certainly would seem that way.
Yeah, I mean, Livy explicitly says that Ahala was re-elected because he was just so awesome.
It makes sense. I mean, he'd done a great job being the sensible one of the military tribunes in 408 and was rewarded with his upgrade to Master of the Horse for being sensible. So
exactly.
Everybody knows he's a good egg and very reliable at this point.
Well, yes, everyone patrician, but sure.
Don't ruin the illusion.
No, I know. I've got my elite goggles on. I'm ready.
So that's basically all I know for this whole year.
All good. Let's get into it. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit confusing, I think, for the next, well, actually probably the next 20 years, but maybe particularly now. So Livy tells me that this is the year in which the truce that Rome had with Veii runs out.
Ah.
As we've noted, that after, quite a lot of kerfuffling, things have been fairly quiet on the Etruscan front, up until now. Like, it hasn't been too bad.
Mm-hmm.
And Veii is definitely a part of that Etruscan northern peoples.
Mm-hmm.
They're not united, as we know. They all have their own little thing going on there. But they obviously share a culture. Veii, however, is the one that we keep coming back to, probably because it's obviously like the closest to Rome.
Indeed. So Veii is considered one of the southernmost points of Etrurian influence in terms of established city.
Yes.
And it's like they do have a sort of a remit of influence that goes further south than that to a certain extent, but this is their last sort of big settlement to the south.
Yeah. Now, the reason why I say this is going to be a bit confusing is that there are, I should perhaps say, questions about the dating of this. So, as you highlighted actually in previous episodes, the timing in other sources like Diodorus that we've been seeing for a few episodes now doesn't really always match up with what Livy is saying. And it does actually seem that Livy is potentially wrong. It seems like they've maybe tweaked the dates a little bit because they've wanted things to happen at particular times.
Oh, what? Interference with the source material? Livy, what are you doing?
And look, it's probably also the fact that, as we know, there's, not the best source material probably for this time period. So what's a year here or there between friends when the source material is batshit unreliable anyway? Yeah. So it is actually quite likely that the truce potentially doesn't happen in this year.
As in the truce doesn't run out?
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't seem to quite add up at this point in time.
Okay.
But anyway, this is what we're dealing with, so let's just run with it. So the Romans want to, find out what's going on and probably renew it, I suppose. And they want to do it in a very formal way. They want to make sure everything's correct. So they're sending out ambassadors and the fetiales, Dr. G.
Oh, I think that's a good idea. If you want to get something done properly, it's got to be right in the eyes of the gods.
Indeed. If you could perhaps remind us what the fetiales are all about.
Oh, the sweet fetiales. Well, we haven't heard from them in a while.
We haven't.
But I suspect that is not because they've not been doing anything. I suspect it's because our narrative sources have just sort of passed over them and assumed that the reader understands that they're turning up to things. So these guys operate as a pair, usually, and they're very involved in making sure that if a conflict is likely to occur, that the signs are right with the gods that Rome will be victorious. So they go out and they're looking for things. And usually, if the situation is looking a little bit dire and it looks like war is going to happen, they'll get pretty dressed up. One of them will wear their very formal attire. The other one will be a bit more plain. And they'll start doing
evening gown, sequins.
Yeah, a little bit of purple, a little bit of gold. You got to look good. And they will deliberately walk towards enemy territory. And they're both looking for signs and they're also reciting certain things. So they're making sort of a ritual gesture. Everything about the sort of the speaking component of this is really important. If you're a priest, you always wanted to have very clear and precise enunciation of words. It becomes one of the ways in which you communicate appropriately with the gods. So they'll get to the edge of Roman-controlled territory and the enemy territory, and they'll recite appropriately, being like, this is a situation, we call upon the gods, bow down to Rome, etc., etc. If not, war is coming for you. And then they'll proceed into that territory and keep reciting that kind of thing at intervals until they get to the city itself. So ultimately, the ambassadors are kind of like your diplomatic mission, and they probably have gone on ahead to sort of negotiate and work out some terms. And then the fetiales turn up, and that's kind of the time where negotiations should have been concluded by now. The enemy should have a good idea that they're not going to make war with Rome and appropriately, and would respond in kind to the priestly sort of incantations that are being offered to them. If they don't, war shall commence. if the signs are good and Rome doesn't get the response that's required, it's time. Send in the armed forces. I think the very worst thing anybody could do would be to kill the Federales if they turned up in enemy territory. That would be a huge issue.
Yeah, that's like killing the Red Cross or something.
Yeah, so we don't have a report of that, at least not yet, but I guess we'll find out soon.
All right, well, I actually kind of love the way that this is all playing out because it's very much like the Romans are like, ooh, I've got to renew my car insurance. Better get ahead of that. Because the Romans are trotting out with their little band of people. And when they get to the frontier of, I guess, their respective territories, because, of course, there has been conflict between these guys in the past. And I think they know very well where, you know, their sphere of influences are. They actually run into an embassy from Veii.
Oh, that's convenient.
I know. And I just love the fact that they're both like, whoop.
Wait a minute. Are you coming to see me? Because I'm coming to see you.
Yeah, it's been 20 years. How you been? So they say, look, would you mind not going to Veii right now? We'd really like to speak to the Roman Senate first.
Oh, interesting.
So the Romans agree, the Senate agree to see them because apparently everybody knows that Veii is having some embarrassing domestic problems.
Ooh. Somebody pooed their pants.
Well, if we've learnt anything from doing this podcast, Dr. G, we have learnt that Rome would never kick somebody when they're down. And so, yeah, at least that's what they seem to think about themselves. And so they're like, there would be no honour in dealing with Veii right now because they're having internal problems and we respect that.
As a place that has many internal problems ourselves.
Indeed, yes. Now, look, apparently this is kind of backed up with what we know. Now, as you know, Dr. G, we don't have great sources from an Etruscan perspective. Like, there's some archaeology and, you know, there's bits and pieces and there's stuff that rocks, you know, that turns up in our Roman sources or pro-Roman sources. But we don't have, like, long narrative histories from an Etruscan point of view, which is a real shame. However, it does seem like there was potentially some internal unrest and that this does have something to do with the fact that the Etruscans do start to peter out.
Okay. So as far as we're aware, at this point in time, the last time that we really, or at least the last time I really remember Veii, it was the issue with Lars Tolumnius. And
yes.
He's one of the Etruscan kings, and his remit included Veii. So the fact that they lost one of their key leaders, maybe they've not necessarily bounced back from that in a strong way.
Look, it could be that, but apparently Etruscan society does seem to have been quite classist. And this may have contributed to additional internal problems, as well as the fact that, you know, their king got pretty severely killed. Anyway, but for now, Rome is like, yeah, no problems. We'll chat, you know, later. No problems. So now we switch to the other people with a V that we've been talking about, the Volscians.
Ah.
The Romans, as we know, have recently conquered a place called Verrugo.
That name will never not make me laugh, Verrugo.
Verrugo, I go. So the garrison that they had left behind to hold Verrugo sent a message saying, "Help, everyone can hear me. You're my only hope."
Oh, no.
Yeah. Now, there was a chance that the Romans, of course, could have managed to tough this out, make it work, but unfortunately, the relief forces that they sent just didn't arrive in time, which makes me think that the Romans, when they received the urgent message, were like, can I just finish my snack? And I've only got like 5 minutes left in the TV show, and then I've just got to have a quick shower and change. Oh my God, where did I put my shoes and umbrella? It looks like it's going to rain, and I can't leave until I found my umbrella. But anyway, by the time the Romans show up, the Volscians are busy plundering away after having slaughtered the Roman garrison.
That is not good.
Yeah. Okay. Apart from my little aside there. Actually, the reason that caused them to be a bit slow was to do with, of course, the leadership, the military tribunes and the Senate. They had heard that obviously they needed help because, well, they were the people that the message was addressed to. But they seem to have kind of overlooked the fact that a garrison is just a small force, and therefore they weren't going to be able to hold out, indefinitely.
Okay, so they just
That's why they weren't in a rush. Yeah, they were just kind of like, oh, yeah, we'll get around to it.
Yeah, there's a garrison there. We have a military presence. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
How many people could the Volsci have?
Exactly. Look how easily we defeated them just a year ago. Maybe not even a year ago.
I see. So
yes.
Maybe a little bit of hubris and maybe a little bit of miscalculation.
Perhaps. But of course, such a horrific outcome could not be overlooked, Dr. G.
No, it's embarrassing. I mean, if Rome wants to save face, they really do need to retake Verrugo now.
They really do. And that's going to take me into 406 BCE.
Ooh, okay. Well, before we launch into 406 BCE...
Yes.
Let me introduce you to what I think is so far the greatest passage of Diodorus Siculus.
Oh, please.
So he starts a new book that comes into this year.
Okay.
And this frames everything. So he kind of is like putting a nice little present around this new book. So I just want to read the opening to you, which is, it's reasonably long, but I think it's fine. And then I'll give you a little bit of insight into like the sort of broader politics that are happening here.
Okay.
So, over to Diodorus, and I quote, "All men, perhaps naturally, are disinclined to listen to obloquies that are uttered against them. Indeed, even those whose evil doing is in every respect so manifest that it cannot even be denied, nonetheless deeply resent it when they are the objects of censure, and endeavour to make a reply to the accusation. Consequently, all men should take every possible care not to commit any evil deed, and those especially who aspire to leadership or have been favoured by some striking gift of fortune. For since the life of such men is in all things an open book because of their distinction, it cannot conceal its own unwisdom. Let no man, therefore, who has gained some kind of preeminence, cherish the hope that if he commits great crimes, he will for all time escape notice and go uncensured. For even if during his own lifetime he eludes the sentence of rebuke, let him expect that at a later time truth will find him out, frankly proclaiming abroad matters long hidden from mention. It is therefore a hard fate for wicked men that at their death they leave to posterity an undying image, so to speak, of their entire life. For even if those things that follow after death do not concern us, as certain philosophers keep chanting, nevertheless, the life which has preceded death becomes far worse throughout all time for the evil memory that it enjoys. Manifest examples of this may be found by those who read the detailed story contained in this book."
I love that. That would be quite the thing to read to, I don't know, all politicians.
I think so. I feel like there's a real resonance for the world as it stands right now, and there are many people who would have benefited from thinking about this lesson.
You know what? I'm going to throw in leaders of large corporations and small ones and medium-sized ones too.
In fact, anybody in a position of power will benefit from this advice.
Absolutely. Parents too. What the hell?
So this is whatever is coming up in Diodorus, and it's not going to be really about Rome, I would hazard a guess, because he tends to
It really is.
he really just sort of gives them like one sentence every couple of years and moves on to other things. But this is a really big time for Athens in particular. So in Diodorus's narrative, we're in about 404, 403 BCE. And this means that although the Peloponnesian War is over, we're immediately thrown into the situation with the Spartan oligarchy known as the 30 Tyrants.
Ooh, and we have talked about this, yes.
Which is pretty bad.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's happening. Meanwhile, in other gossipy news, for those who are interested in a little bit of Greek history, the really famous or infamous Alcibiades of Athens is put to death by Phanarobaras, a satrap of King Darius in Persia. So that doesn't go well. Also, this is the year where we lose the philosopher Democritus, for those interested in ancient philosophy. Look, he had a good innings. He got to 90. It's not so bad. And also, we do get a mention of, and again, I'll quote, in Italy, the Roman garrison of Aequians, in brackets Verrugo, because he doesn't know the name of the place, a city of the Volsci, was attacked by the enemy, who captured the city and slew most of the defenders.
This is very true.
And that
Never has he been more correct apart from the name of the place.
so correct, except for not knowing where it is, what it's called. But yeah, Excellent. He gives one whole sentence to that situation.
I love it.
So we will say that it's a cliffhanger episode right now.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I know you're all dying to know how the Romans are going to deal with this situation at Verrugo, but I'm afraid you're just going to have to wait till the next episode because 406 is so gigantic that if we talked about it now, you'd be here for like the next 2 hours, I think.
We certainly don't want to deprive you of that, but we're going to give it its own 2-hour slot in the future.
we will. All right, Dr. G. Well, that means that it's time for the partial pick.
Oh, boy. Miscellaneous eagle noise here. It's the partial pick. It is the time where we rank Rome against its own qualities, the things that it values most. So there are 5 categories. Each are possible to get 10 golden eagles in. So that means if Rome is doing its very best to be its best self, it'll get 50 golden eagles.
Look, I'm not going to lie. I feel like we've kind of set Rome up for failure here because there's not a lot happening in 407. Certainly not a lot to their advantage. And they would, I think, have had a more interesting score if we'd been able to do them together. But it's just not going to happen. We're just going to have to, they're going to have to cop it on the chin.
I think they'll be fine. They'll survive.
Yeah. All right. So what's our first category, Dr. G?
Our first category is military clout.
Definitely not.
That is a big no.
No.
What they do is they dilly-dally and they leave their garrison unsupported.
And they all get killed.
Even Diodorus noticed. I mean, that's how bad it is.
Exactly. I feel like, it being corroborated is reassuring. Okay.
So, 0. Okay, diplomacy.
Okay, now there is something to work with here because the Romans actually seem to be trying quite hard to get along with Veii.
Yeah, I think there is something to be said for them accepting that they will receive those ambassadors from Veii rather than just powering on with sending their own and talking at cross purposes.
Yeah, and they're also imagining that they are a kind and fair people.
Cute.
So, look, I'd be willing to give them an 8 for that.
What?
Well, I mean, it's some diplomacy. Like, we very rarely see this.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, it's some diplomacy, but it's not like they've conceded anything. They've just said, sure, we'll listen to you.
But then they were like, look, we know you're having issues and you don't want to talk right now, so we'll give you some personal time.
What more could one ask from a friend?
Yeah, okay, I'll go for like a 6. How about a 6?
I think that's far more reasonable.
Okay, a 6.
Okay, the third category is expansion.
Definitely not. It looks like they're facing some serious reverses.
If anything, they've slightly contracted.
Oh, they definitely have, yeah.
So that would be a 0.
Yep.
All right. Virtus.
No.
Yes, good old-fashioned Roman virtue is not on display here. I don't think we get enough sort of characters coming through in our source material right now to make an assessment. So I think we have to give them nothing.
Exactly.
And finally, the citizen score.
Well, look, they're not technically at war, but I don't feel like citizens would feel great about the whole Verrugo situation. I mean, it's their countrymen that are being slain, seemingly because the Senate and the military tribunes forgot that a garrison is not a large army.
Well, or maybe they just thought, oh, who knows?
Look, they're probably more being overly confident in their Romanness, but,
All right, so it's not a great time to be a citizen, but it's not the worst time. There hasn't been like a forced levy. Some people have died, but not a lot of people have died because they didn't send any backup, so...
Not yet. But look, I'm willing to only give it like a 2, seriously, because we just don't get enough information. Like, what's to say?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. That means, Dr. G, that the Romans have finished 407 on a grand total of 8 out of 50 golden eagles.
Oh, now that is yes. This is what happens when you only look at a single year without a lot of source material.
Well, it's true, but you know what? It was worth it to hear that passage from Diodorus.
Oh, Diodorus. I'm like, he's given us a really sort of nice sort of moral outlook for what is to come. And I know, although he's not very interested in Roman history necessarily, that it stands as good advice to all those who achieve positions of power. How do you want to be remembered for your legacy? How do you want your memory to come through in subsequent times? Those things that you think you're getting away with now will come back to count against your memory.
Unless, of course, because world leaders and corporations are failing to do as much as they need to on climate change, history ceases to exist with humans.
Oh, boy. Oh, no. Yeah, look, let us pray and hope and take local action wherever we can to do our best to ward off such a fate.
They're definitely, like, let's face it, climate change doesn't mean that, if we fail to act enough, which we are, it doesn't mean that humans are going to be extinct like that. And therefore, misdeeds will be remembered, at least for a few generations.
They certainly will. And we can see the globe changing all the time in terms of its climate. So, yeah.
And the good news is we actually have all the technology and all the science that we need. The only thing we're really lacking is action, united action.
Yeah, moral leadership.
Indeed. Well, on that very philosophical note, Dr. G.
It has been a pleasure to chat, as always.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Partial Historians. You can find our sources, sound credits, and an automated transcript in our show notes. Our music is by Bettina Joy de Guzman. You too can support our show and help us to produce more fascinating content about the ancient world by becoming a Patreon. In return, you receive exclusive early access to our special episodes. We always like to thank our beloved Patreons, but today we would like to give a special shout out to some lovely people who bought us a coffee on Ko-fi. Tina, Jackie, and Anne-Marie, thank you so much for your caffeinated thoughts. However, if you're feeling like your currency has been devalued by an evil emperor, then please just tell someone about the show or give us a 5-star review, and that goes for our book as well. Until next time, we are yours in ancient Rome.